My name is Stacey. I'm a peer career advisor here at the Luddy Career Services Office and a graduate student studying computer science. And today, I'm going to be talking to you about one of what I believe to be the most important aspects of the job search process, and that is how to make the most of a conversation with an employer or an interviewer. And today, it's even more important because we're specifically going to be talking about how to talk about yourself in the 10 minutes at the Luddy Career Fair when you meet one-on-one with an employer who's trying to get to know you a little bit better. And I've broken down this process into 3 simple steps that I think can help you to kind of place where you need to put your efforts in order to succeed. The first one, of course, is research. If you are ever meeting with any employer or interviewer, any company you're interacting with, it takes a little bit of time and a little bit of effort to go out of your way and just Google that company and do a little bit of research on them and the position. That little bit of research will go a long way in saving you time that is valuable, especially in that 10 minutes, as to what the company is actually doing. What does the position entail? What's the work hours like? These are all things you can learn ahead of time that will give you more free range to talk about yourself when you have that opportunity. When they go to ask you questions, then you can spend more time giving them the answers that will pertain to their company and not necessarily deviate from the topics they'd like to be talking about. Additionally, when they ask you if you have any questions, you can spend more time asking questions that are meaningful. Ask them about their time at the company rather than something trivial like what's the pay that you might be able to find on a place like Glassdoor. My second step is then know your plan. So you've done your research and you've figured out what you want to talk about. Write those questions down ahead of time that you can't find online. Maybe you can't find a lot of information about what the team structure is like at this company. That's the type of thing that you would write down and then come back to later during that 10 minutes. Additionally, knowing the projects that you want to talk about. Maybe you took a course 2 semesters ago where you worked on a project that sounds exactly like this interview. Perfect. That's exactly what you want to talk about now. So, think about these types of small details and be able to tailor your experiences. Know your plan. Finally, you have to execute and adapt. This is obviously the most complicated because it is the most versatile step of the system. Once you actually get into the interview, there's no guaranteeing that they're going to ask you the questions you expect or that the conversation is going to go any way that you want it to go. So how do we adapt to that? Well, the first step is, of course, to be comfortable. And I know this is difficult because obviously job interviewing is an extremely stressful and complicated process, but you need to remember that those first few steps, researching and knowing your plan, are going to help you succeed. You have to rely on those minimally to just kind of reassure yourself you know what you're doing and you're going to succeed. Along those lines, of course, is also the consideration that once you get in, you kind of have a base expectation that'll form your thought processes. And that should help you kind of reassure and bring those nerves down. And if you do get nervous, don't worry about it. It happens to everyone. So, how do you actually execute now? I'm sure you've heard of the STAR interview method, which relies on a situation, a task, an action, and a result. Of course, the real complicated step here is knowing how much to talk about each one. So if I were to talk about one of my internships, I would specifically try and break down and hit on each note specifically and to a certain degree of time. The situation. We'll talk about one of my internships where I was working on helping the shipping department of a company become more efficient and make fewer mistakes. That's the whole situation. I don't even need to tell you where I was working for you to get the understanding of that's the problem. How do we solve it? Okay? So then the task. How did I solve it? Well, I was given just about nothing in terms of where to go with that, so I had to gather the requirements, I had to develop a plan, and I had to figure out what I was going to do and what tools I was going to use to succeed. I ended up settling on building an app using Microsoft Power Apps because it could connect to the company's pre-existing database system and would allow me to pull that information in a meaningful way. Then all I had to do was attach the app to a phone and the phone to a barcode scanner to make sure that now, whenever you ship something off to a customer, you have to scan it first and ensure that it lines up with the system. Additionally, when you scan it, it marks it in the system as out for transport, which means other people can't go scan the same item and create issues. Okay, so now I've explained to you my situation and my task. What did I do? Well, it was as simple as that. I went to the shipping department. I spent a day there kind of going over the base processes, figuring out what things were, gathering those requirements I talked about earlier. Then I sat down, and over the course of a few weeks, I developed an app. I went back to the shipping department with my initial prototype, and I asked, what features does this have that you enjoy? What features is it missing? Turns out I forgot a button that would allow them to actually get the information they need as to where these products are. Better yet, I decided not to make it a button at all and to make it that more important than the title of each chemical, because these individuals didn't really know what the titles of any of these things were. They knew them by the barcode labels. Perfect. Now I can attach my scanner, I get everything going, and by the end of my summer internship, I've created a working app that connects up to a barcode scanner. Result. And that's it. That's the STAR method. Now, you'll notice that to me, the situation should be extremely brief. You don't need to spend a lot of time there. It simply needs to hit on what you were doing, why you were doing it. It's usually about a sentence. From there, you can start talking about the task. This is where I want to foray into the tools a little bit. What do I think is most important here? Well, to me, I thought it was important that it was very independent. So I emphasized that I had to gather the requirements myself. I emphasized the fact of the tools I was using. I decided to develop a mobile app because that was something I had experience in. And finally, I move on to the action and the result. The action and the result really flow together. The result is rather brief, but this is a good opportunity at the very end to talk about what you define as success. For me, success meant that the guys in that office who were going to be using my product on a daily basis were happy. It worked well for them, and they were able to get something meaningful out of it. Additionally, I spent a lot of time talking about the actual action, the steps I took. Of course, this is because it gives the interviewer meaningful details to latch onto and ask you questions about. They could ask me more about the platform. What type of language is the Microsoft Power Apps platform? It's a scripting-based language. It's rather similar to Visual Basic. Perfect. Short little answer, they can answer their questions. But it gives a lot of these points where they can latch onto. What was the requirement gathering process like? What was this process like? When you went into the shipping department, what were you looking for? Were there any challenges? That's actually something that is always a good thing, and you don't want to stray away from. Challenges are a good thing. Why? Because they show how you react to adverse situations. For me, a specific challenge that I faced was trying to get this whole thing to connect to the company database in a meaningful way. Well, go into the company database, talk with my boss a little bit, and you realize the reason my data isn't linking up is because I have a hidden character issue from the barcode scanner. Great. I always delete the hidden character, and now I can correctly fetch information from the system. That's a small issue, but that took me like 4 or 5 days to figure out because how was I supposed to see a hidden character? It's a small little challenge that I could really talk about at length and what it taught me about Unicode parsing, but it's a pretty small detail that makes for a fun little interview topic. And overall, that entire thing took me 2 to 3 minutes to talk about from start to finish, if not less. And I feel like you get a pretty detailed picture of what I was working on. So that's how you nail that 10 minutes. You know your strengths, and you talk about these things in a defined way. I can talk about 1 to 2, maybe even 3 stories in that time and still have time for questions, and each story have been defined. You want to find things that show something that is pertinent to the position. I usually pull that story out to talk about it when I know I'm going to be working in a position that's more independent. Or if I ever had to go to a position where they're like, hey, do you have any experience with mobile apps, right? This is the type of experience that lends itself well to those situations. If I was applying for a job at General Motors, I would talk about my internship at the Visteon Corporation where I was working on the software in a Ford F-150. That's just a little bit more applicable than talking about my internship experience at a chemical company. Know your interviewers, know what you're looking for, know the job position, and it'll turn out to be really easy. As for nailing the 10 minutes, stay calm, know your 3 steps. Research, know your plan, execute and adapt, and you should have it nailed.